Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Crimson Vegas, and we're going to be playing Age of Wonders 3. Now, I know what you're thinking. Crimson, you've already played Age of Wonders 3. Well, previously, I played with the Golden Realms expansion only as the Halfling Sorcerer, but this time there's going to be the Eternal Lords expansion, which adds the Frostling race, the Tigrans, and the Necromancers. And this time we're going to be playing as the Frostling Archdruid, which is one of my favorite classes, by the way, and with one of my favorite races, actually. The Frostlings was my favorite from Age of Wonders Shadow Magic. They just had a lot of cool mechanics. They could pretty much freeze the terrain itself with minimal effort. They had I think the Snow Queen or something like that. She could, wherever she walks, she would freeze the terrain. It was almost overpowered, by the way. But it was a lot of fun. And yeah, so I'm going to be playing as the Frosting Archdruid. And there's a lot of gimmicks that I want to try, which is basically the concept I'm going to be trying here is the taking control of wild animals, as many wild animals as possible. So we're going to be building, we're going to be training a lot of sort of shamans, and we're going to try our best to recruit as many Archdruid heroes as possible, so we can just control a bunch of animals, particularly spiders, which, by the way, are just amazing. And we're going to try our best to control animals that evolve, and we're going to try and keep them alive for as long as possible. So all of our specializations and abilities are going to be geared towards capturing animals and keeping them alive as long as possible so they can evolve and get better and better. And believe me, it is totally worth it. It's a lot of fun. It's a bit difficult to maintain, but it's a lot of fun if you actually manage to pull it off. So we're going to jump into the random map. Now, previously I played with 5 players in a large map site with a lower difficulty, which turned out to be not very challenging. In fact, the game quickly became rather boring, even though we were at war constantly. But yeah, it's not a lot of fun. So I'm going to play with King, which is actually quite more challenging than before. Yeah, there's a bit of a difficulty jump spike, from lower to King, but it's fine. It works perfectly well. And we're going to stay on large map. And I will have the underground disabled for reasons that I will discuss shortly. Actually, I'm going to discuss right away the victory conditions. I think the Eternal Lords expansion is the one that adds the seals and the Unifier Victories. The seals victory is basically, there's going to be, the map, there's going to be a bunch of seals. I think there's like 6 or 7 of them. It really depends, I think, on the size of the map itself. And if you defeat the Guardians and you put a unit or army on top of it and just occupy it, it will count down, or count up, rather, seal charges. And when you have 40 of them, you will win the seal victory. I think that's how it works. So you can occupy multiple seals, and it's not sort of a capture and hold situation, which I don't really like this victory condition, to be honest. It just doesn't really work for me. I mean, the game has a lot of mobility. You're encouraged to go out and fight and defeat a lot of enemies, but this one forces you to pretty much play defensively for a lot of the time, and you already have your hands full defending your cities. But now all of a sudden you're like defending these seals. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. In fact, most of the time I actually exploit this because the AI, for some reason, really loves to play the seals victory. They will always go straight for the seals and try to occupy them and just get their ass handed to them, because I just go straight for their cities and annihilate them directly, and they would have very few defenders there because they put all their eggs in one basket in the seals themselves. So I don't like this victory condition, but I'm going to keep it enabled just to showcase what it's like, and we might actually take part of it if we end up having a lot of large armies and very small units, especially as the Archdruid, because we can summon units out of thin air, which is amazing. The Unifier Victory is a lot more interesting for me. It's sort of like the economic victory condition for this particular game. Because if you play vanilla, these two conditions don't exist, and there are very few victory conditions in this game as is. It's basically one. It's all about the military. It's about building as many units as possible and going out and conquering people. But this one actually offers you a different route, the economic route, basically. And it has to do with happiness and population and the number of cities you have. Basically, for every race, if you reach, you will advance, you will gain governance, depending on the happiness on the population of the cities themselves. So when you reach a governance level of champion, you can build a beacon, and then you light the beacon, and then you repeat the process with a second race. And when you do this twice, you will win the game. If you have 2 beacons and you light the beacons, you will win the game. So it has to do with population, and I'm not going to repeat myself again anyways. So yeah, it's very interesting, especially on large maps, and you really sort of need to acquire a second race as soon as possible, have a bunch of cities for them, and yeah, that makes it pretty good. Now, the thing about why did I disable the underground? Well, because the seals do not appear underground, which is a bit of a disappointment, actually quite a huge disappointment, especially if you want to play as a Goblin Archdruid and you want to start underground, which is something that I actually wanted to try at one point. But it's just because there's no seals underground. I could have disabled the seals victory altogether, but I just wanted to have like a full experience. And the fact that they don't seal underground was something that actually bummed me out quite a bit. But nevertheless, we're going to be playing as this, so let's jump in. Alright, and so these are going to be our specializations. I'm going to show just a quick explanation, a bit of an introduction here, before we jump in. So why did I choose fire? Well, this one seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. Actually, at first glance, you might think, well, wait a minute, you're playing as the Frostling, why would you want to go with fire? Well, it's I'm not going to play with fire because of thematic reasons, but rather because we really, really need this. First of all, the fireball, it gives a little bit of an extra punch to your spells when it comes to fire, because there's not a lot of fire spells available to the Archdruid, or indeed the Frostling races. The Frostling race doesn't have any kind of... well, the main damage types they're going to have is basically physical and ice. And then as an Archdruid, your shamans can actually deal ice damage. So you're going to have a bit of a mixture between ice damage, blight, and physical, basically. Which leaves you very vulnerable to, let's say, Draconians and it's going to leave you vulnerable to, I think, Dreadnoughts and Necromancer players. Dreadnoughts and Necromancers can actually really punish you pretty hard, and so you actually need something to counter them. And one of these things is the Fireball against the Necromancers. And you can summon a Hellhound, which is a beast, so it already synergizes very well with the Archdruid, and it has 100% fire immunity. So if you're going to play against a Dreadnought or a Draconian player, you have something to counter with. You can summon a bunch of these guys, and you can just rush them as soon as you can. I got the Skin of Oil. I really like it because it will reduce resistance, and this actually turned out to be quite useful if you're trying to capture as many animals as possible. Because apparently the Befriend Animal ability, which your Shamans and some Archdruid heroes have, it will check against the resistance. It will roll against resistance. So the lower the resistance of the enemy, in theory, you'll be able to capture them more easily. And the Frostlings already have disabling units like the Ice Scaper, which we're going to be using a lot. This guy can basically freeze enemies with every attack. So you can freeze your units, the enemy animals. You can lower their resistance, and then you can sort of capture them with Befriend Animal or whatever. And even your Shamans have Entangle. And if you manage to summon spiders or capture spiders, then you can actually web down future animals, and it makes the whole process way easier, and it really works pretty well. There's a lot of synergy there in terms of capturing the animals. So this is the fire. Why did I pick water? Now this one is a bit of a mixed bag, but for the coolest things by far is the Rot, which gives you an extra venue of attack against both machines and undead. So this is basically the perfect combination. The perfect attack to deal with the two sort of enemy classes that are going to be very dangerous against us, the Dreadnought and the Necromancer. So yeah, it's really good. It not only does it deal damage, but it also applies weakness, and it only costs 20 mana. So it's even cheaper to cast than, say, the Locust Swarm or the Chain Lightning, even though it only applies to machine and undead. But chances are there's going to be a lot of undead in this game. Machines are not very common, to be honest, in the wild, but undead, they are way more common, and we're going to be dealing with them a lot. So this is going to be an extremely useful spell throughout the game when dealing with undead. Vengeful Frost is not very important, like I said. This is a very mixed bag kind of specialization, and we don't really need it because we already deal a lot of ice damage as the Frostlings. There's Freeze Water, which is kind of thematic, and it could be useful if we're playing in a water map. You can actually freeze ships with this thing. Units in the ocean that are actually swimming, you can freeze them for like 3 turns, and then you can walk over. I've never actually tried attacking units while they are frozen, but it would be interesting to see. The Summon Baby Kraken is a bit of a sort of it's not that great, to be honest. It does synergize with the Archdruid, but I really want to try and see what it's like to evolve a Baby Kraken into a Kraken, and it's just a badass concept, and it would actually be kind of helpful in defending against a sea invasion, I suppose, especially if you're playing against humans and such. So Baby Kraken, quite a cool ability, not very useful, unfortunately. And finally, the creation. Now, the last specialization here was a bit of a toss-up between Adept of Earth and Creation. Now, why did I not choose Adept of Earth? Well, even though it has the very amazing Stone Skin, which will make your units much tougher. So if you have like a bunch of spiders and you want to keep them alive so they can evolve into queen spiders, yeah, you can give them a lot of defense, and then you can just use web against your enemies and a bunch of resistance. So it keeps them alive for a very long time. Unfortunately, all the other spells in the Adept of Earth are rather terrible, and they don't work for us. For example, Domain of Earth. Target-friendly city now likes subterranean terrain. Well, we don't have subterranean. We disabled it because it doesn't apply with the... it doesn't have any seals. So why would I use subterranean terrain, and why would I use Domain of Earth? It doesn't really synergize very well. Now, if I were playing as dwarves, the Stone Skin would have been a little bit more useful, because apparently there are 2 dwarf units that have Shatter Strike, and they deal extra damage against enemy units with Stone Skin. So you can actually cast Stone Skin on an enemy unit, and then you can deal extra damage against them. So it's kind of a bit of a mind game situation. Pretty cool. Unfortunately, the Frostlings have only 1 unit with Shatter Strike, so this thing does not synergize with them very well. Stoning is interesting, but again, we're not going to be needing this too much. It's not going to help us against Dreadnoughts, it's not going to help us against Warriors, and it's not going to help us against Dwarves. So it's, I mean, it's a bit of a redundant kind of spell. It would have been great if you're playing as, let's say, I don't know, maybe possibly a Theocrat, because you can have a lot of other damage types and you don't have a lot of physical, so this would have been useful in that situation, but right now it's just not great. Regenerate was, yeah, it would have been great for Dreadnoughts, but not for us. We're going to be roaming around and attacking a lot. So yeah, so we're going to be playing with the Creation, because finally you can heal your units. So you can already keep them alive with healing, and you can bless them, giving them, it's slightly weaker than Stone Skin, and slightly less dynamic, but it's pretty useful, and it can, you know, sort of an all-round usefulness. And extra happiness is kind of nice, because, you know, you're going to be keeping your animals happy and hopefully deal more critical damage. So it's still pretty much the same thing. And finally, Cleanse Land. So if, as Frostling, you can have happiness penalties in, let's say, the volcanic terrain and tropical, as you might expect, because they're sort of cold people. So you can actually convert these terrains, almost any kind of terrain, into temperate, which is neutral for all races. And afterwards, you can even go with Domain of Life, so that you can actually start liking temperate terrain, your cities. So there's a lot of synergy here, and it's kind of thematic. You're playing as the Archdruid. You're trying to revive the land and make it more sort of hospitable to life. So this kind of makes sense in this regard, and it works very well on Blight as well. It immediately cleanse Blight, and Blight is almost universally hated by all races except the Goblins. So yeah, there's a lot of synergy here, and you get +5 mana from Water nodes, Fire nodes, and I think Radiation nodes. So yeah, you in theory, if we acquire any of these nodes in our domain, we gain a bunch of extra mana, which will be great for summoning. So overall, I think it's perfect, and I can't think of a better way to play the Archdruid. Now, there's a lot of other new specializations introduced in Eternal Lords: the Shadow Adept, the Grey Guard, and Keeper of the Peace. I might actually play one of these later on as a Necromancer. Yes, I'm going to be playing as another. I'm going to go have another playthrough with the Necromancer, hopefully, and some other race. Hopefully the Orc, I suppose, and I might play with the Shadowborn. Very interesting abilities there. But the thing is, they're not going to be very useful here for us, because we're mostly going to be playing... Well, we're going to try and go for the good side, but I don't need these things, honestly, because most of my units are going to be summoned anyway, and it's just not necessary. So, let's just go back a little bit. We don't need to edit anything out. I think this... I called her Yukina, the Ice Maiden. I don't remember exactly where I got the name Yukina. So it's just I think I picked it off from the internet. It's probably inspired by some kind of anime or something. I don't remember exactly. But yeah. And it kind of makes sense to, you know, an Archdruid to be a female sort of character. It just makes sense thematically for some reason. I just figured it would be pretty appropriate. So yeah. Let's jump in. Now, if the starting location does not have a lot of ice, I might end up re-rolling multiple times, and until we get the sort of ideal starting location. So we're going to see what we get right now.